Boyle, I'm going to get started out in Mobile. The Senior Bowl, obviously a lot to take away from that one. Mike Macdonald joined John Schneider out there, and you detailed some of the sights and sounds for Seahawks.com. You guys should check out the article if you haven't. But why don't you bring us back there and just, either tell us about any conversations you had with the coaching staff or just what stood out from the weekend.
Yeah, this is the first time I've gone to the Senior Bowl. It's not something we've covered in the past, but decided to go largely because Mike Macdonald's going, which adds an interesting element. You think, too, kind of as I wrote about in the story, a year ago at the same time, he's just getting hired. It was, the Wednesday after the AFC and NFC championships, he gets hired. This year, he's able to dive into the process, and I talked to him a bit about that. And for him, it was important. He wants to be part of this. You can obviously watch film and get an idea what players look like, but big part of it is evaluating the person and getting to know guys. And he's trying to find the guys that fit what he wants to do. So getting to be around them up close was important for him.
Boy, obviously, Mike Macdonald is a confident person, right? But I would assume that being in this situation, like, there's a lot of posturing going on, right? You got head coaches everywhere, you got scouts. Like, how do you feel like he maneuvered through crowd of, okay, this is my second year, I've been here before, just your observation of his demeanor and how he interacted with people?
You bring that up. He was joking about, like, John's the guy that everybody, knows and loves there. It's like he was saying you can't walk anywhere with John Schneider without him getting stopped a million times because he's been in that scouting world for so long. So I think for Mike, it was just, I think he told me he'd been to the Senior Bowl once before with the Ravens in like 2018, but for him, it's just, a chance to get around players, be around the scouting department. I know he has a ton of respect for what that group does. He obviously didn't know those guys before he got the job, so he's had a year working with them, and he's really impressed with how they handle themselves. And he knows they're the ones kind of driving the evaluation process, but he does want to be around it and be a part of it this year because he just didn't have time to a year ago.
You mentioned it's nice to get out there and actually meet with players and see them, and that's just a different kind of experience, maybe talk to coaches face to face. Boyle, you've covered a number of drafts, and there have been many classes where Pete and John made it clear that, he's just our type of guy. Maybe there were personality traits really admired about that guy. I'm assuming with Schneider, there's a lot of carryover with this new regime. But have you gotten a feeling from Mike Macdonald about the type of person that he really likes on his team?
Yeah, I think we're starting to learn that a little bit. I mean, yeah, the phrase that you've always heard John Schneider and his guys use is smart, tough, reliable. And then he likes to throw in and fast. I think that was a Pete edition. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the same things. I mean, what team doesn't want guys who are that things? But I think Mike in particular, we're seeing like two things he brings up a lot is guys just really loving football. I think, he's a coach that, he wants guys to practice hard and practice long and, maybe a little more old school mentality despite being the youngest coach in the league. So he wants guys who really love the game. And then you got to, especially his defense players, like you got to be smart. You got to know what's asked of you and, not putting blame on any individual players, but we saw during the season, like if guys aren't the right fit, he's not afraid to make that change right in season. So again, this goes back to, I think, a big reason why he wants to be part of this process is it's like, hey, your first year as a head coach, you can't have all the guys you want just because you inherit a roster and yeah, you make changes, but largely those are guys that you did not pick. So if he can start looking at, okay, this guy not only fits our our physical criteria, he also is, the kind of character we want, the kind of guy who sees the game the way we do. That's a big deal to him.
Quarterbacks obviously are the highlight at these situations in Mobile. Were there any quarterbacks that impressed you, and how much time did Mike Macdonald spend looking at those young arms over there?
It's hard. They're bouncing around so much, and we're in different areas, so I can't really give you, hey, he watched this quarterback or these guys. I will say fans would be happy to hear when they circle up and all the offensive linemen are doing the one-on-one drills, as pass rush drills. He was paying attention to that, so I know fans are really excited about maybe adding some offensive linemen, so they're paying attention there. But yeah, it's hard to say watching. I was there for 2 practices, and your attention's pulled a lot of different ways. Honestly, a lot of my time was more trying to tell a story of like what our scouts are doing there than what the on field stuff is. But I think all those guys, as has been well noted, like the top 2 guys weren't there, and the rest of them are all guys who have a lot of good traits and maybe some things that need polish.
How many scouts do travel to that? How many did the Seahawks bring, and is that a typical number, or were there more other teams that had just a bunch of guys?
No, I mean, most teams have just about everybody there. The one issue is the Shrine game kind of overlaps now. So you have some guys maybe can't be there the whole week and show up later, and there's different time constraints. But for the most part, this and the combine, it's just about all hands on deck when it comes to the player personnel departments.
Hey, John, one of the biggest conversations that we are having this offseason, I'm sure you're not surprised at all, is kind of what this front office may do with the contracts of both Geno Smith and DK. I won't ask you what you think they should do. Rather, I'll just say for their time. Well, it's a tough spot. It's so many different opinions, and I think that most people could make a case for either. But what can you tell us about the timeline that this front office might be working with for either of these players, when we might expect decisions to need to be made, or, if there are certain parts of contracts that kick in?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have the contract details in front of me but you're right. There are certain players that have bonuses that come up or guarantees that kick in. So that's usually sort of the trigger for things like that. I'm sorry, I don't know the dates of those, but yeah, I mean, look, every year there's a lot of tough decisions. This year just happens to involve, guys on the final year of their deal who are pretty high profile guys. And, Mike Macdonald's made it pretty clear how he feels about both DK Metcalf and Geno Smith. So obviously there's decisions to be made, but I think they really like having both those guys on the team.
Boyle, in the words of Kevin Garnett, anything is possible, right? And me and Stacy had this conversation earlier. I think we agree. Myles Garrett is out there. He said he don't want to be with the Browns, and we walked through it, and I think we convinced ourselves there's no way it's going down, him coming to Seattle. But do you think they're taking a good look at that situation?
Look, I think I forget who one of the national reporters pointed this up. Like, when a player of that caliber is mentioned as a trade possibility, or in this case, asked for trade, every other team will at least, there's a conversation we had. Maybe it's a quick conversation, and it's, we don't have the draft capital, we don't have the cap space, whatever. But I mean, we're talking about probably a Hall of Famer, arguably the best defensive player in the NFL over the last few years. Like, you're gonna at least, you're not doing your job if you're not like, what do we think? But look, there's probably better fits in terms of cap space available and draft capital. But as you said, we'll quote Kevin Garnett and say anything's possible.
Every single person's looking at that offensive line as a clear area for this team to improve. Is there another position group that, John, you've kind of examined as the season's ended and gone, I wonder what they're going to do there?
Yeah, I mean, some of it can just depend on free agency. Like, you feel a heck of a lot better, obviously, about linebacker if Ernest Jones is back. If you, for some reason, can't sign him, that's a pretty big need all of a sudden. I mean, they like what they saw from Tyrese Knight as a rookie, but you're going to need another starter in there if for some reason you can't get Jones done. Now, both he and the team have talked like they want it to happen, but, we know there's a business side of it that has to get done. Yeah, I mean, even offensive line, that's an interesting one. Obviously the performance wasn't what they wanted, but I do think there's maybe a little more optimism that some of these young guys can develop. That, again, they're going to address it. I'd be shocked if they're not drafting one or more linemen and trying to sign guys. But I don't think this front office is just looking at, we need 3 new starters or something like that. Especially, you're going to have a new coaching staff, a new scheme, and maybe they're viewing this as a scheme that can help these guys, perform better. But yeah, I mean, as John Schneider would tell you, they're looking at everything. You're never satisfied at any one spot. But I think, depending on what they want to do with some contracts, there's a lot of spots you could look at and say, okay, if this guy's back, you feel good about it. If they move on from player X, Y, and Z, then all of a sudden that becomes a bigger need. But yeah, linebacker with Ernest Jones really jumps out. And then, I think there's a few other spots that you just try to fill in depending on what you do with some free agents.
From what you know of Kubiak and his offense, is there a position that you feel like, other than the offensive line, you only go like 3 places, I guess, that you feel like the Hawks might draft just to add some depth to?
Boy, it's tough to say. I mean, I'm not going to pretend I've watched a lot of his offense, but just from what I've read and what I've seen, it sounds like, he maybe goes a little heavier tight end wise sometimes and likes a fullback even sometimes. And that's, the Seahawks have tight ends they really like, but, that could be places they want to get deeper. Again, we talked about receiver already. There's some big names that they have to make decisions on contractually. And depending on who's back, that could be an area they need to address as well. But yeah, I don't think it's necessarily certain positions. It's just maybe, whether it's linemen or tight ends or receivers, like how do these guys fit what Kubiak likes out of an offense, what his assistants, we all know he's working on the staff and bringing in what those guys are looking for as well, because this scheme will look a little different than what we saw last year. So it's, might suit some guys better than others.
Boyle, a conversation that me, Bump, and everyone else are going to be having about the Seahawks, obviously, as we lead up to the Super Bowl is, well, how do the Seahawks get back there? I mean, it was just the anniversary of Super Bowl 48. I was watching a ton of highlights yesterday. It was a really fun trip down memory lane. And then you realize, like, man, this footage looks a little grainy. Like, I don't know if this is 4K. Like, it's been a minute. I'd love to see this team get back there. When you think about kind of the steps they need to take, how close do you think they are? And what do you think might be one of the biggest catalysts to help them get there?
Yeah, how close is always a tough decision, especially when we don't know, some big decisions they got to make between now and when they get back here in the summer. But I know there's fans who are gonna be like, "Oh, you're so far from the elite." But I feel like in this league, the gap is just not that big, other than maybe if you have Patrick Mahomes. But I just feel like if the scheme can make life easier on your quarterback, don't be so, drop back and pass as much and get the run game a little more balanced. Maybe we're seeing offenses more under center, more play action, things that weren't really as frequent as you might like to help a quarterback out last season. I think we could see the offense take a nice little jump, and I would expect the defense to look a lot more like it did in the second half of the season with a full off season than when they're kind of all learning on the fly last year. So, you take a 10-win team, play better defense for the first 9-10 weeks of the season, and hopefully get a little better on offense. That all of a sudden can get you right in the conversation of teams playing for not just playoff spots but high seeds. So I don't think it has to be some long process if you make the right decisions this offseason and if you get this new offensive scheme to hit.